All right, let's get started. My name is Dan Cuellar. I'm the creator of Appium, and I'm here today to talk to you about Appium. So, show of hands, who here knows what Appium is? 5 people. All right, this may not be the right slide deck for that. It's fine. We'll wing it. Cool. So, I'm here to talk about Appium, which, for those of you, most of you, who don't know what it is a framework to allow you to write functional UI tests for your mobile applications. So that would be iOS applications, Android applications, Windows Phone applications, web applications that run on mobile phones, and websites that run on mobile phones. So all of the above, Appium is the tool you want to use for it. So like I said, I'm Dan. Oh, this has gotten worse. Um, well, just have to roll with it. I'm Dan. I created this thing. I have a Twitter. I'd like it if you followed it. At some point, it'll come in handy to have a bunch of Twitter followers, so I'm stocking up for when I have an arch nemesis that I need people to be angry at. I currently am head of software testing at a company called Food It in London, startup, and before then I was head of testing at Shazam, which is that app that tells you what song's playing in the club. And then before that, I worked at a dating site. Actually, it was very popular here. I think it's called Zeus. You guys actually might know what it is. This part of the world actually used it. And then before then, I worked at Microsoft on some products you may know and love, like Outlook and Excel. And then way before that, I got a computer science degree. So anyways, Appium, let me tell you the story. So it all started sort of at a conference like this, but a different one. So I had just taken the job as head of testing at a company called Zeus, which was one of the bigger online dating sites in the US at the time. And it was my first experience ever having to make a test strategy for mobile applications. Before I'd worked on Outlook, before that Excel, and before that websites. And so never really done anything that run on a phone. And back then, I think that would have been 2011, so about 3 years into when Apple made the App Store. So mobile apps were just starting to become popular, and people were actually starting to make money off them, and they were starting to become really important. So I moved to a dating site where a lot of money was being made on the mobile application, but it was pretty new. I think it had been in the store about 3 or 4 months. It was quite important that it keep working for the bottom line of the company. And frequently it didn't. And the interesting problem was that, well, I say it starts with the most terrifying 5 words in software testing, which are these, available on the App Store. So iOS presents a unique challenge, one that we haven't seen, I would say, in a long time in software engineering. The challenge being, on a website, when you make a mistake, you push new code to the server, everyone gets the fix. Browser caches be ignored. But like in general, people get your fix pretty quickly. And so if you make an error, you're not paying the consequence of it for very long. Just as long as it takes you to investigate, fix, and deploy the fix, which for most web startups is a few hours or something like that. On the App Store, however, whenever you want to push a new version, you have to submit to Apple. Then they do whatever they do. No one knows. It takes forever. It takes days. I think they say some prayers. I think there's some rituals and some static analysis runs, something like that. No one knows. And then 5 days later, you get a mail saying, oh, we're sorry, you don't meet this unwritten policy that we have, but we'd like you to change this. And then you submit again. And then the point is, you can't just fix it in an hour. It takes a week or longer sometimes. It's gotten a bit better lately, the last year or so, but in general, it's still, you're looking at days instead of hours to fix things. So when you make a mistake, it's quite costly. And to me, coming from a different background, this all sounded quite familiar. It reminded me of these little things. Who here has ever used one of these? A couple of people. Oh, half of you, all right. So before, I don't remember what changed all this, but at one point software came on CDs and DVDs and things like that, and before then discs, and before that floppy disks, and before that tapes, and before that, I don't know. That's too old for me. But the thing is, when you make a mistake on something like Windows and you're putting it to a CD, it's very expensive because you have to throw away all these disks, these physical objects, and they take time to print. They cost money, and there's all sorts of things that have to go into making a CD. So when I worked on Office, like Excel, we were still making CDs back then, and so the testing process was quite rigorous. And then when I worked at places like websites, the testing process a little less rigorous. And so I thought, what was something that we did in these days that would be useful for this problem? And the answer was test automation. So I looked around, and the things that were out there, this is 2011, by the way, were all quite terrible. No offense if the Robotium guys are in the audience or anything like that. But all these tools are terrible, especially the one on the left. But I guess it's your left, my right. Anyway, so they're all bad. And so I asked my boss, I told him we shouldn't use any of this stuff. It's terrible. We're going to end up spending so much time maintaining the tests. I may as well just hire a bunch of manual testers, just hit the buttons every time we want someone to run the test because we're going to have to fix it once a week. And so I said, let me take a week, see if I can come up with something better. And so me and the iOS manager at the time, we went out and we looked around and we saw what was out there. And we said, wouldn't it be great if we could just, it was like Selenium, where you could just send it commands and then you could get responses. The problem with UI automation JavaScript, which is the framework on your far left, my right, is that it requires you to write the tests in JavaScript in advance, and then you run it inside the Profiler app. I don't know why Apple thought the Profiler was a good place to put the automation runner, but that's where they put it in Xcode 4. And so that's where you run your tests from. So not only are you writing tests in a different language from the one that you write your app in, back then you were writing your app in Objective-C and you were writing your tests in JavaScript, but they're also running inside the Profiler, which makes no sense whatsoever. So we came up with a hack. The hack was pretty awesome, and I'll tell you about it. Apple left one hole in their sandbox intentionally. They have a method in the UI automation JavaScript called perform host task arguments with timeout. And what that method did was it allowed you to call shell commands on the host machine running the Profiler. And once you can run shell commands, you can do anything, right? Like Python is a very awesome shell command. There are other good ones. We ended up using cat, Python, and I forget the third one. So we wrote a program that was just a while true loop, and it sat there, and it scanned a folder for files, sequentially ordered with predictable file names. And when it found a file, it would cat the file, then it would run eval inside JavaScript to execute it like it's JavaScript code. Then it would take the output and it would use Python to write it back. And then it would increment and look for the next file. And then we wrote a client-side set of bindings that would take Selenium commands and convert them to raw UI automation JavaScript commands, drop them in a file that then this server would read, and then wait for the output file to be written, and then spit that back. So what we were able to do was we were able to take our existing Selenium page objects, implement them on mobile, and have this layer in the middle perform all the tasks. So now we're using the Selenium protocol, which you normally use with a website. We're using it with mobile devices. And this was quite powerful because we had a full suite of tests already written for the website. So once we implemented a few page objects, everything worked. So if you think of like a dating site, your tests are quite reusable no matter what platform you're on. Like on a dating site, you're wanting to check for things like subscribers can message other subscribers and non-subscribers. Non-subscribers can't message anybody. So those tests translate quite well no matter if you're on a phone, if you're on a browser. So this was quite magic that we got all this business logic verified on all our platforms quite quickly. So anyways, I thought this was pretty cool. Everyone was happy. I would say our mobile app stopped shipping bugs, but that took a little bit longer. But eventually this was an important piece of that strategy. But so I had a conference already on my calendar at the time, and it was a Selenium conference in London. I was there to talk about something entirely different. But as part of my talk, I showed off the iPhone automation we had done, and everyone in the crowd was like, "Ooh, what is this? How are we doing this?" And so they asked me to give a lightning talk afterwards. And so I go, and if you don't know what a lightning talk is, it's a 5-minute talk that you just go up and anyone can sign up for them at the conference. You don't have to apply or anything. So I gave a 5-minute lightning talk on it. Everyone thought it was amazing, and then nothing happened. No one called me, no one emailed me, no one tweeted at me. It was like this moment where I was like, oh, everyone's going to love this, and they loved it, and then nothing happened. And so I get a phone call several months later. I get invited to this conference over here, along with everyone else who's written some sort of iOS or Android automation tool. And at this conference, all the people are in the room. People see it. Some companies get behind it. And now, I think 3.5 years later, it's quite a big thing. So what is it? It is an implementation of the Selenium JSON wire protocol that controls native and hybrid apps. And it is the most popular mobile automation framework at the moment. It has a pretty simple philosophy, 4 main ideas. One is that you use standardized techniques and APIs. So we're not calling private APIs that Apple doesn't want us to call. We're not hacking anything. We're not rooting your phone. We're not jailbreaking, nothing like that. The second is code in the language of your choice. So most other frameworks required you to pick a language. So something like Calabash required Ruby, or Rebodium is in Java. Or if you use something more native like UI automation, it's JavaScript, or Espresso or UI Automator, those are Java frameworks. So for people who had already had test teams writing tests, unless it was in the language they were familiar with, they would have to learn a new language. I feel like someone's about to be arrested. I see police officers and stuff. Anyway, ignore me. The next principle is do not modify the application under test. So pretty much every other framework required you to install some SDK into your application or add an HTTP server to it or just modify it in some way to use it. And we didn't want to have people do that. And last, we always pledge to keep it free and open source, and it's still Apache license to this day. Pretty simple how it works. I described it as a server. You send it commands over HTTP, it spits them back over HTTP, and it uses the sanctioned frameworks. In the case of iOS, it's UI automation JavaScript, or if you're on Xcode 9, we'll pretty soon have XCUI test. And then for Android, it's currently UI Automator, but we're moving to UI Automator 2. And for Windows Phone, it's a little more interesting, but we'll go into that later. So by the numbers, 3,000 stars, 2,000 forks. I think we are one of the top 200 most forked projects on GitHub, and I don't know what that means because we're nowhere near the top 200 in stars. But people really like to fork it. I don't know what that means. Maybe it needs lots of patches. Over 150 contributors, 5,000 commits, 150,000 downloads of the V1, which was 2 years ago. So God knows what it is now. And 3,000 issues fixed, which is a plus and a minus. Plus in that we fixed 3,000 issues, but minus in that there were 3,000 issues to be fixed. So if you want to see the code, this is what the setup looks like. A little different. This is the iOS example. You just add some additional capabilities that you wouldn't normally see in Selenium code. In this case, it's the platform version and the device name and the app. So app is the path to your application you're testing, or the bundle ID if you're using a real device. Device name is just what phone you're using, so iPhone 6. And then the platform version is just the operating system version for iOS. So, and then for Android, there's a few extra. You have to supply the activity and the, what's it called? I need to look. Package. And the package. But other than that, after that, it's just the Selenium you're just used to. So finding elements, pretty simple. We have by class name. So in Selenium, that would be your HTML tag name. But in this, it's UIA and then the name of the element, which you find in the accessibility inspector. For Android, it's like com.widget.android.whatever. It's quite long. XPath is supported the same way. And likewise, accessibility IDs work. And then there's a few others I won't list because they're less desirable. And it all just looks the same. So tapping is .click. Send keys is send keys, just like in Selenium. And there's some new stuff like swipe and drag and shake and whatever other things you can do on a mobile phone that you can't do elsewhere. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the web views. So if your app has web content in it, you can access that web content and then write a regular Selenium test against it. And in many cases, you may already have those. So you can just use Appium to launch Safari or Chrome or your app that has a web view in it. And then you switch the context to the web view context, and you can just start executing regular Selenium commands as you would on a web page. So the app is fully automatable, which is quite nice. So that's pretty much it for Appium. It's not a whole lot to teach because it's just Selenium, only it works on mobile now. You add a capability, there's a few new actions for mobile, but by and large, if you know Selenium, you can write an Appium test, which I think is why it's become so popular. So I'm here today to talk about Appium 1.5, which was released last week. So I will tell you what is new in Appium 1.5. I left this slide blank on purpose because there's nothing new in it. But I felt like that was kind of shit, so there's some stuff that's kind of new in it. We completely rewrote the whole thing. It was written in ES5, I believe, so a very old JavaScript, right, JavaScript level, and we've upped it a bit. So now we have async await and some other fun stuff. No more callback pyramids for you JavaScript people, so that's amazing. It now has full continuous integration and unit tests, so there won't be 3,000 issues to fix this year, I promise you, because we have unit tests, so when we fix one, we won't break others. The only real functional changes, we had like a bunch of command line switches before, and now they've been moved over to capabilities. And we have like a governance structure and a code of conduct now. I don't know about that, but it exists, and I'm supposed to obey it. So why do we write it? We rewrite the whole thing. 3 years of patches and organic growth leads to an application that's quite unstable. When I wrote Appium, it was just to do iOS. And then there was a pull request one day open for Android. I was like, all right. And then someone else was like, oh, we could do Safari with it. And someone else opens a pull request. And so this tool has eventually grown to do more than it was intended to do. And it's been patched and patched and patched and patched. And after 3 years of that, it becomes like a Jenga game where you pull any block out and God knows what's going to happen. So that's fixed now. I can attest to that being fixed. So we had lots of complaints about the instability. It wasn't very modular. Like, people kind of put stuff in there, but it was never designed to support all these different operating systems, all these different platforms, and now it is. And now it's well tested and good and stable. So what's coming next? Now that we've done all this work, we can actually make changes to it and not worry about breaking things. So in the past, everyone sort of found their favorite Appium version, and then they didn't ever upgrade because they were terrified to. And then eventually they would have to upgrade because Apple or Google would release a new Android version. They need to, and then they'd have to spend 2 weeks fixing all the new things that had changed and find all the bugs and all that kind of thing. So not anymore. We can do new stuff now. So we're going to bring in Windows support, which we've had sitting around for forever. We just haven't been able to bring it in because we were too afraid of it would break Android and iOS. And given how few Windows phones are out there, it doesn't really justify the risk. But now that there's no risk, hey, why not bring Windows Phone on board, even though they run Android apps apparently now? That was announced like a week or two ago, wasn't it? So just in time for us, hey, maybe we don't integrate it. I don't know what the futures of Windows is, but I guess Windows 10 will be around, and we have support for that. So while Windows Phone may be, who knows what's happening with it, Windows 10 will be around and runs on phones, and so we have that working. We're also going to write some new GUIs. I wrote all the old ones. They haven't been updated in several years. They largely don't work anymore, but people still use them. So we'll rewrite one in Atom or Angular or something so that it works everywhere. We don't have several code bases. We also have multiple new iOS backends. And this is actually quite exciting. I'll go into detail in a minute about those. We're doing an Android backend rewrite with UI Automator 2, which will make it work a whole lot better. Better docs, that kind of thing. So Windows support, it's happening. There's already a working implementation that you can use that's not in the project. It's in a separate repo. But some people at a company that I'm not talking about maybe working on one at the moment, their logo might be on this slide. But in the meantime, there's some Siberians that have written a working implementation, several working implementations that you can use to get you through until until whoever does their thing. New iOS backend. So the people at Facebook have written one called WebDriver Agent, and this one is actually quite cool. I don't know if it's going to work with iOS 10, but it works with iOS 8 and 9, which is good enough for me at the moment. It's called WebDriver Agent, and it breaks the rules of Appium, so it's not exactly integrated into the project, but it's useful enough that we support it. It works by calling a bunch of private APIs that Apple doesn't want you to call. And it allows you to do things that you can't do with regular Appium, with the regular implementation, like multiple simulators and automating applications you don't have the debug certificates for. It doesn't work on real devices, but it lets you do pretty much anything you'd ever want to do on the simulator, which for business logic intensive apps is probably good enough. If you're working on something that is hardware intensive, like a video game or something like Shazam, probably not all that useful for you, but for the people writing newsreader apps and social networking apps that aren't really stressing the hardware or using the camera or something like that, then you're good to go with this. Or if you can actually segment your tests, like the tests that don't touch the hardware, you could do things like where you have two phones talking to each other, cool things you couldn't really do before on Appium without some huge headaches. And then there's a new one, XCUI test, written by the Appium project. And XCUI test is the framework that has supplanted UI automation JavaScript going forward. So it was introduced with Xcode 7 and iOS 9. And in iOS 10 and Xcode 8, they're going to deprecate UI automation JavaScript and not support it anymore. Not that they've ever really supported it, but they're officially not going to support it now. And so we've already written a new implementation using the new framework. It just doesn't work as well as the old one, so it's not the default. But in theory, the reason why it doesn't work as well is because it doesn't work as well from Apple's end. Like our implementation is fine, just all the methods they provide us, yeah, the docs are lies, the things don't do the things they say they do. But they will hopefully in Xcode 8 because they're getting rid of the old one. Cool, so that's a real quick overview of the Appium universe. I was expecting to get a little more experience, so I have some like secrets and tips and tricks and things. Sounds like a beginner talk. Might have been a little bit more appropriate, but if not, let's do this. So I'm going to go over here now and do some demos of things. So this one is kind of interesting. So, sorry, let me go back real quick. There are 10 secrets of Appium that I'm going to show you. These are things that aren't in the docs that no one tells you. And I'm going to show them to you. So the first is that we support AppleScript. Does anyone here even know what AppleScript is? One person. Two. So this is not all that awesome, but AppleScript is a scripting language provided in OS 10, and the Appium project is entirely AppleScriptable. So if you wanted to do something like launch an Appium server, it's all in here. Appium. It's right here. You notice it's not running at the moment. Flush the log. I hit AppleScript. Runs on. And I could even stop it from AppleScript. If I build it, stop. And you notice it stops. The whole thing is there's a dictionary if you want to learn how to do more. But some people find this useful because they want to run the GUI when they run their automation. And you can script the GUI just like you script the other part. And so you see here's all this stuff. It's all fully there, whatever you want to do. All right, moving on. There we go. Number 9 of the secrets is that we have a bunch of cool cloud providers, 2 of which decided to update their logo in the last week. And so they're not accurate on this slide. But you can see there's a bunch of people that if you don't want to set up your own device lab will gladly sell you one at a very high cost. But it's not so hard to set up your own. There's Selenium Grid for that as well. But I'll do a special call out. If you're enterprise level, something like Perfecto Mobile might be what you're looking for. And then also, I think that TestDroid, TestObject, and Sauce Labs for sort of the more regular level. Like, there's some pretty cool stuff going on there as well. The Amazon stuff, not so great right now, but maybe someday. Anyway, so there's a lot of choices out there, a lot of competition, which is really cool. Another thing people don't know is that I wrote this silly project several years ago that makes it work with Mac apps. And so I'll show you that. The initial idea for Appium was actually automation for apps, so it wasn't mobile specific, though I've titled this talk Mobile Automation Made Awesome, which probably undermines that a bit. But nonetheless, let me show you this. This test is going to automate the calculator app with Appium. So let's get the server running. I haven't pre-built it, I'll just run it in Xcode. And we should see the server running down here at some point. There you go, there's the Appium for Mac server. And now if I go to this folder, you should see there's a calculator script. So I'll go ahead and launch the calculator app just so it's on the screen and I can position it. And this test is just going to add some numbers on the calculator and make sure they work. So you see this is Appium driving OS 10. So it's a cool little project. I don't know how many people use it. Not very many, I would imagine. Incorrect result. Either the OS 10 calculator is broken or there's a bug. I don't know which. It's Apple, who knows. So anyways, actually, I forgot the, 1 second. I'll show you what the code looks like. It's just regular Selenium code, so this is the code for that little thing I wrote, and you can see it's just driver find element and element.click, but it's OS 10 now. Anyways, let's move back on to PowerPoint. I have cooler demos coming. And actually, at some point, I should show you guys how Appium works, because apparently you haven't seen it. Visual testing is supported by Appium, so visual testing frameworks are things like Sakuli and Geis and things like that. So there's a company in Israel called AppleTools Eyes, and they write a neat little plugin for pretty much anything, but it works with Selenium and Appium, where you can take a screenshot, run your tests, and then take screenshots throughout it, and you can store a baseline, and then when you rerun the tests, it can compare the screen at the time of your test with the baseline and highlight regions that have changed. And you can actually program it to ignore regions that change, like the time and the date and things like that, and allow for certain kinds of changes in other regions. It's quite flexible and quite cool. I won't demo it because I don't have time, but it's definitely worth checking out. There's also Sakuli integration for Appium now that's public. It's been around for years, but it was just kind of kept to someone and someone else made it public. So you can find an element by an image. So for video games and things that don't have proper UI element hierarchy, because they're just a big OpenGL view or whatever, you can actually test those too with Appium using base images and Sakuli's sort of recognition technology. And then TestDroid in their cloud has a private implementation. I don't know how it works, but it's the same thing as the other one. They've implemented it. This is a question I get from a lot of people. This is like the #1 question I get about Appium, is that whenever we release a new version, people want to know, when can I get the GUI? And like I said, I haven't worked on the GUI in years. So the GUI doesn't get updated a lot, so often it doesn't get built. But funny thing you can do with Appium, I'll show you this. Under the developer settings, you can supply a custom path to Appium like that. So There's a Appium that comes bundled with the GUI. In this case, the GUI is, what version is it? 1.4.13. So that's about several months old. But if you look, when I run this, actually, when I run this, it should say a different version of Appium. You should see somewhere in here that I'm running Appium 1.4.16. And that's because I've chosen the custom package path. Let's see. There we go, that worked. Should print the version number at some point. Well, just have to trust me. Oh, here it is. There it was. I saw it. Here we go. See, we're running 1.4.16. That's a neat trick. So you don't have to wait for us to release the code. You can just git clone it and update it as you like. Let's move on. Oh, multiple servers. This is another question we get. People say, oh, Appium can only do one device at a time. And while that is true, you can run as many copies of Appium as you like on your machine. So this is a cool example put together by Jonathan Lips of Sauce Labs, who is probably the biggest contributor to Appium, more than me and more than anyone else probably. And here he is going to, I'll just explain while it's, while it's running. He's going to use 4 Android emulators and an iPhone simulator to be his backup band while he plays a song. So he's going to have a drum kit on 2 of the Android emulators, I think pianos on 2 of the Android emulators, and then like a screen reader for lyrics on his iPhone that synchronizes. And he's going to play a song. So this is Appium. Script, 5 servers at once, 5 devices, and then Jonathan. So you can see it's sending commands to the drum kits and the keyboards to tap things to play his backup bands. 5 at once, 1 computer. I won't play the whole song. But if you're not convinced, there's an even more insane demo done by Jonah at Sauce Labs. This is called Appium Jukebox. It's a 16-track MIDI sequencer. So each Android device hooked up to this giant server will play an individual instrument from the MIDI file on it. So let's do fast forward. So you can see that's the beast that can have 16 Android phones draining power off of it at once. And then as we scroll around, you can see these are our Android phones. This is probably like $10,000 worth of hardware, I want to say. And they're each playing 1 track from the MIDI file. I think it's Eye of the Tiger. Anyway, so we do support multiple servers at once, if you were wondering. It was actually really hard to come up with 10, so I kind of faked one. We won some awards once, so people like us. I'll skip that. Another thing people don't know is that we support writing tests in Objective-C. So I wrote the Selenium bindings for Objective-C. They're available, they work. If someone wants to write Swift ones, that would be amazing, because all they'd have to do is take these and like write the equivalent of a header file around it, and then you'd have them. So anyways, if you have developers who write tests or write apps, and they want to write tests in the same language, you can do that. On Android, we've always had Java bindings for Selenium. Selenium's written in Java. But Objective-C ones have been around for 3 or 4 years, and just no one knows they exist. Windows is supported, and so this is the Russians I was telling you about earlier who've written their own Windows support. It's a company called, anyone know how to say 2GIS? 2GIS? No. 2GIS. Hey, I got it right. I don't speak any Russian. So it's called Winium Project, and they've written it, and it works quite fine. And so I'll show you a video of Appium running on Windows. We should just fast forward to the point where it does something interesting. So launching the Appium server, and it's going to automate the Windows Phone emulator. And I think it's like a calendar or a note app or something. You'll see. There we go. So you know what automation looks like. I won't bore you with more of it. But let's see it on Windows Desktop. Same thing. Now they're the same platform with Windows 10, but here's the calculator app being driven by Winium using Appium. So at some point the calculator is going to pop up. Hopefully it prints the correct result, unlike the Mac one. Wasn't my bug, I promise. Anyway, cool. So now you've seen Appium works with websites, web views, hybrid apps, Android apps, Windows Phone apps, Mac apps, iOS apps, and Windows desktop apps. So it really is automation for apps. Though currently it's mainly automation for mobile apps. But I'm going to show you one more thing. So I brought a friend today. I've been hiding him, and hopefully this can be seen. So this is a fun demo, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing. So this right here is a 3D printed robot. He has a finger, and he has some arms, and they move. And this is my phone. Hopefully no one messages me with something embarrassing in the next 5 minutes. And what I'm going to do, actually first let me get out of here. Let me put my screen up here so you can all see it. That's not my screen. That's my screen. Wonderful. So you see my screen. It's just my screen. So I'm going to place it underneath the robot. I should plug him in too, actually. Oh. And let me explain what I'm going to do. So Appium runs on simulators and devices. I've largely showed you simulators today, but this is a device. All right. And so first step, let's launch Appium on the device. So here's Appium. I've already pre-configured it. And I'm going to launch the Appium test app that we use for continuous integration. I wrote it, or it's been modified by the people, but I wrote it. So look at this wondrous app and think, I've met the guy that wrote this. It's quite special. Here we go. So brilliant iOS app written by myself. I'm so proud of it. Anyway, I had some help though. Anyway, so Appium is running on the device, and I'm going to open the Appium inspector. So this is just the Appium inspector if you haven't seen it before. And it lets you inspect the DOM, so you can see there's a couple of text boxes, whatever, text, whatnot. So let's have it do something interesting. So normally with Appium, if I didn't hook up this robot, when I told it to type in a text field, it would call the automation API, the UI automation JavaScript API, and then whatever that uses will type text in the field. But, I don't know, why wouldn't it be cooler if we had a robot do it? So what the robot integration with Appium does, and I'll show you, it's this robot settings tab that mysteriously is here. You just set the robot on a port and an IP address, and I actually need to run the server, that reminds me. Let's start the server up. The server just listens for robot motions, and then Appium's going to generate the appropriate ones. So, robot's locked and loaded, phone is underneath running Appium. I have the inspector open. The inspector actually uses the Selenium bindings to talk to Appium. So when I tell it to tap this text field, the robot is going to tap the text field. Did he miss? Everything was going so well. It's probably this platform. Let's see, maybe if I... Well, sorry. Come on. Maybe is it not grounded, maybe? Is the ground not plugged in? What's it looking like? Oh, no. Okay, it is working good. Well, we'll give it a little help for now, but then it'll do the rest. That was not that impressive of what I was asking it to do. So anyways, I should get rid of this. So there you go, you can see. Let's have it type something that's a bit more impressive. I get the feeling this isn't going to work today. All right, we'll have it type the number 12. All right. I didn't calibrate it before I came here, so it's using the old calibration. So there you go. Robot took the Appium send keys command, type 12. Now let's have it tap this other text field. Be good today, robot. Oh, you can hit that one. All right. I'll take a random number from the audience. Does anyone have a favorite number? 42. Everyone always says that. Someone said 3.14 and then recited 20 digits of pi at the last conference I was at. So you can see, hey, 42. And then lastly, we'll have it hit the magic button, and it should come up with 54, I think. There you go, 54. And people always ask to see this. They're like, can it swipe? It can swipe. So I'll just write one really quick. So like I said, the robot just runs over HTTP. And it just takes regular command line argument or regular HTTP arguments. So content type. It's application form encoded, and then so we'll tell it to start at the x position of 200 and y equals 0 and end at 200 and y at 200. I should make this start y. So this is going to go 200 pixels to the right and 0 to the top y, and then swipe down. All right, thank you. That would have been embarrassing. Start X, start Y. Oh, thank you. All right. Several errors with that. Now, this thing should bring down the notification tray. And it does. So anyways, that's all in there. But let's go back. So I'm going to unplug him now and put my thing back in. And I'll finish the talk because I have questions. I have 10 minutes for questions. Where's PowerPoint? Come back. So you may be wondering, how did all that happen? That seems not easy. Hopefully it doesn't seem easy because it's not. It's quite tricky. So there's a calibration app. Actually, let me show it to you. Because I have my QuickTime over here. So it's over here now, isn't it? So there's an app on the phone. And so what I didn't show you because I don't have time, it takes like 5 minutes to do this, but the robot, we set the phone under it with Appium running, and he lowers his pen step by step until he touches the screen. And then the screen will display where he's touching. So what we do is we put the phone under the robot, and he lowers his finger, and eventually he strikes gold. And we get a point, then we take a north point and an east point, or X and Y. And then we build a translation matrix, and I'll put the math back up. We build a translation matrix and we take the inverse, and once we do that, we can convert vectors between the two coordinate systems. So the coordinate systems being the robot's real world, X, Y, Z, and the phone's, X and Y. So I guess X and Y on the phone. So you can map how many centimeters in the real world maps to how many pixels on the screen, and vice versa. And then there's some other translation that occurs, but that's the gist of it. So what Appium will do then is when it receives a touch action like tap, instead of sending it to UI Automation JavaScript, it'll ask UI Automation JavaScript, where is that thing? Give me the coordinates. Then it gets the coordinates, and once it has those, it uses the matrix algebra to figure out what to tell the robot to do. And then once you have a command the robot understands in centimeters, you send it onto the robot, and he moves the correct number of centimeters, taps the correct keys on the keyboard. So what you saw when he was typing keys, it was querying the DOM saying, where's the Y key? What are the coordinates? Convert that to robot centimeters, X, Y, Z, and then lower the finger there. So pretty neat. So it works with anything. If you have an existing Appium test, it already runs on the robot. And there's better robots. This one's old. This is like 2 years old. There's a company called Tapster Robotics that makes these things, and I've heard the new one is quite special, but I have not seen it yet. So I have 10 minutes for questions before I finish my talk. So anything you'd like to know about Appium, anything you'd like to see, the floor is open for 10 minutes. If not, I can just lecture.
So from what I have seen, the Appium is very UI based. Can it be integrated into continuous integration pipeline in the some cloud CI like Cycle CI, Travis CI?
Good question. So I showed that slide earlier with all the cloud providers. They're specifically for that purpose. So you could write your test in JUnit or whatever you want to write that you hook into CI. And then you call out to Sauce Labs over the web, and instead of having a local emulator, you get one in the cloud. So you send your Selenium commands over HTTP to some server in California somewhere probably, and then it's accessing some Android device somewhere in California, and then it just spits back the results. So yes, that's quite common. I saw someone over here had a hand earlier. Anybody? All right, far back.
Hi. As it happens, I'm not a tester, but it's probably a stupid question. But can you test a video game UI with Appium?
Yes. Earlier when I showed the find by image support, that's specifically there to bring video games on board because they don't have a traditional DOM hierarchy. They're largely just an OpenGL view or something like that. You can use images and Sakuli, which is pretty good at finding images even with bits of distortion and manipulation in there. And you can do things like that. So Testroid is a company, I think, that has had that on their servers for several years now, and they have quite a few clients that make video games. I've seen a demo with like a racing game. I've seen someone do Angry Birds with Appium, so people have done stuff. It's quite doable. But you need the find by image stuff, which doesn't ship natively with it.
If you return to the example of the robot, when the robot didn't click the button, how you can see like logs or?
So normally that wouldn't happen because I would calibrate the robot before I do the talk, but he's calibrated from like 3 weeks ago. So
it is possible to see the logs that it's not clicked.
your test would fail because you would expect some change to occur. Like then you'd start trying to type keys and you'd take a screenshot and that kind of thing. So most people, after every action, they take a screenshot, like in their harness. Some harnesses do that for you, and so you would just see that he did a tap and the keyboard didn't come up. I think in iOS there's a way to query whether or not the keyboard is up too, so you could add a check for that in your test.
Then the second question about the screenshots. Are you saving all the screenshots from every test, or they are rewriting, or how you?
By default, Appium doesn't do any of that for you, but people like Sauce Labs and Testroid and Perfecto, all their test harnesses will do that, and then some of the other ones like Serenity and I forget some of the other ones will do that for you. But out of the box, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Regarding continuous integration, well, if I don't use the cloud solution, but I want to set up my own server with blackjack and stuff, and what is the best approach to use simulators or a real device connected to my server?
It depends on what your application is. So at a dating site, there was no advantage to testing on real hardware because it's all business logic, what we're verifying with the app. Yes, performance, then you would have a definite advantage testing of an emulator. That being said, I don't know if using an automation framework is an accurate way to measure performance, but it depends on what you're doing, right? So the answer, I guess, is it really depends. So yeah, if you want to test like page load time or something, the automation framework probably isn't going to add enough overhead to make a difference with that. But like when I worked at Shazam, we tested music recognition. We wouldn't test the time because there's some lag in Appium trying to click things and that sort of thing. So yeah, it depends what you're testing. If it's business logic, the simulator's fine. It's more stable than real devices. On real devices, you get incoming calls, you get text messages, they run out of battery, things happen. On the simulator, you're always clean. But you're simulating, right? You're not testing the actual operating system. So there's trade-offs, and you just need to be intelligent about which one you choose for what application. So I've worked at places like Shazam where it only made sense to use real devices. And then I've worked at places like Zeus, a dating site, where it would make no sense to waste our time using a real device.
Question about Android and iOS. Do you have some cases when test works fine, it looks like it writes something, it calculates and so on, but in real life it doesn't see it. It's somewhere in background, for example. So test actually went okay because it used automation tools, but in reality, I don't know, for some reason, user didn't show.
I think, this still happens with anything. You'll see this on Selenium, like there'll be some weird thing you didn't think of, or some, like garbage collection was running, or the device was switching mobile networks, or it's some particular model of Samsung Galaxy that you weren't testing or something like that. So it does happen, but no more than with anything else. All right, I have, one more.
Hello, thank you for presentation. I have a question about web page testing, mobile page testing. You mentioned in the beginning of presentation. Does it work so like regular web page testing in Selenium, or so I can use the almost same tests, or there are some
Okay.
differences?
You can use precisely the same tests because inside Appium, whenever you have a web content view, so like an element in your application that contains web content, all you have to tell Appium is switch to that view, and then you just run Selenium tests on that. So when you have Safari, it has one giant web content view, and Appium is smart enough where if you say use mobile Safari, it'll just switch for you. But if you have an application with like 5 browser windows or whatever, once you switch to that context, you're running Selenium. You're using Chrome driver, or you're using, I forget what for Safari, WebKit remote debug protocol or something like that. But you're just using the same stuff you would use on desktop, so it just works. I have 3 minutes left. I will do a closing real quick then. So one more question maybe if anyone wants it. Not, I can just yammer. Right, yammer it is. So, cool, I have time to inspire people. So, I have one takeaway I always like to end my talks with. This isn't really the talk where it's appropriate because this is more like a survey of Appium, but nonetheless, I get all you people in an auditorium for 3 more minutes and I'm going to use it. So, that being said, I like to always end with this quote from Steve Jobs. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. You can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you realize that, you'll never be the same again. And the Appium project has taught me this tenfold. So when I started this project, I was just a guy that was tired of getting yelled at because chat kept breaking on the mobile app and we kept losing money. And I looked at what was out there, and I thought it was all shit. And so I wrote this thing, and 5 years later, there's probably 500,000 people that use it or something like that. It's quite crazy. But I'm no smarter than all of you. I worked at a dating site, which, no offense to dating sites, but we're not sending shit into space or anything. We're storing shit in a database and reading it out like it's it's a CMS kind of. Anyway, it's not the most complicated. We're not Elon Musk. We're not like landing rockets on battleships or whatever he does. So nonetheless, my point is this. You guys have great ideas. I'm sure some of you do. Please go to conferences. Please share them with people. Please tweet about them. Please contribute to open source projects. Open source moves forward because people like you have good ideas and they share them with people. And so I just like to tell my story of 3 years ago, I was at a dating site getting yelled at, and now I get to travel the world and talk to you guys all the time and tell you about Appium. So I would like other people to have that fortune. So please share your ideas. I'm not a genius. Neither are you, but like anyone can come up with this stuff. Like just because someone did it 10 years ago doesn't mean it's good and doesn't mean it's the best solution. So at the time, everyone was using Robotium. And if you've ever used Robotium, use Appium, night and day, Appium's better. And so, but every expert would tell you, 5 years ago, use Robotium, it's great. And it really wasn't. So if there's anything you think sucks and everyone thinks is great, play around with it. Maybe you can make something better. So I'd just like to close with that. For more info, appium.io is our website, github/appium/appium. Follow me on Twitter, like I said earlier. Like I said, I need a loyal army of followers to unleash upon a victim at some point. And if that's it, thank you for inviting me to Riga. It's been great, and I hope to come back sometime. Thank you very much.